The weapon, and we do know that the suspect did bring a weapon, a loaded 9mm high-capacity handgun, to a riot. We do know that. As far as what happened in that intervening moment with the video that you just showed, that's going to come to light through the investigation. That's being investigated, and those facts and those questions will be answered soon enough. Dan, I think what we need to take a look at here is the situation in its totality. What happened leading up to this situation? The suspect decided to inject himself into a law enforcement action. What's not being said here is the fact that Border Patrol agents and law enforcement were conducting a targeted law enforcement effort against a violent, illegal alien that was nearby, and that suspect injected himself into that law enforcement situation with a weapon. And what happened between when that situation first came about and the shooting, that's going to be investigated, and we're going to get to the facts of that. In fact, I believe that the fantastic training that our law enforcement partners have, the fact that they're highly trained, prevented any specific shootings of law enforcement. So good job for our law enforcement in taking him down before he was able to do that. And again, Dana, let's look at why he was there in the first place. Was he simply walking by and just happened to walk into a law enforcement situation and try to direct traffic and stand in the middle of the road and then assault, delay, and obstruct law enforcement? Or was he there for a reason? Did he fall victim to that violent and heated rhetoric by a Mayor Fry, a Governor Waltz? Look, Dana, they're trying to portray Border Patrol agents and ICE agents as Gestapo, Nazi, and many other words. Did this individual fall victim, as many others have, to that type of heated rhetoric? Dana, we heard the law enforcement officer say gun, gun, gun. So at some point, they knew there was a gun. So again, that is going to be part of that investigation as to what was happening on the ground there between those victims, the Border Patrol agent victims, and the suspect. No, I didn't say that, Dana. I never said that. What I'm saying is we respect that Second Amendment right, but those rights don't count when you riot and assault, delay, obstruct, and impede law enforcement officers, and most especially when you mean to do that beforehand. When you mean to do that beforehand, when you show up to an active crime scene, don't leave the crime scene and you're armed, then you've got the decision-making process for that individual doesn't seem to be very good. Now, back to the Second Amendment. What you're saying about the Second Amendment is peacefully protesting with firearms. Absolutely, I've done that myself, and fully support that, but not when you perpetrate violence, obstruct, delay, or obfuscate Border Patrol in the performance of their duties in an active crime scene. He meant to be there beforehand. Again, Dana, he came there beforehand for a reason, because he was there. It's very evident. Absolutely, I didn't say it wasn't, and I didn't say it wasn't legal, but he cannot assault federal law enforcement when he does that. That's an active law enforcement crime scene that he decided to enter into. Dana, law enforcement doesn't assault anyone. Follow directions of law enforcement. Follow directions of law enforcement in an active crime scene. It's very evident he didn't want to do that. Very evident that the other individuals didn't want to do that. And, it's too bad the consequences had to be paid because he injected himself into that crime scene. I can't say that enough. He made the decision to go there. We didn't make the decision to talk to him. We didn't even know that individual was in existence until he came into that crime scene. Sure. The fact that he was standing in the middle of the road, there was interaction between him, the bystanders, and law enforcement, and again, follow directions of law enforcement. He doesn't need to be in the middle of a crime scene. Dan, I don't think you would want to be in the middle of a crime scene, or you would want civilians in the middle of a crime scene injecting themselves into something that is none of their business at all. Yeah, again, the officers on the ground, in that melee, we hear gun, gun, gun. So that gun at some point became visible to officers. Pure speculation, and that is why we have an investigation, Dana. That is what we are investigating. You're not going to know that now, and I'm not going to know that now. Sure, Dana, first he was there in the scene. He was in the scene actively impeding and assaulting law enforcement to the point. And Dana, now Dana, let's don't freeze frame adjudicate this now. He was there for a reason, and that reason was to impede law enforcement to the point. And here's a good point, Dana, is the fact that de-escalation techniques were utilized during this action. Those de-escalation techniques, whether it was physically trying to remove them from that law enforcement scene, that active law enforcement scene in which law enforcement were going after a violent illegal alien, or the use of pepper spray, which is another de-escalation technique. Those techniques did not work. Officers always try to use the minimum amount of force necessary to either effect an arrest, which in this case was more than likely 18 U.S.C. 111, assault on a federal officer, or impede, delay, and obstruct. Dana, we don't need a suspect's help in an active law enforcement scene. We don't need his help. We didn't ask his help. That's an active law enforcement scene. He knew that was an active law enforcement scene, especially when the officers approached him, and it's very evident he did not need to be where he was, and he decided on his own to stay there. You know, Dana, every situation is different. What our officers are faced with here in Minneapolis are chaotic, very difficult and violent situations in which individuals, and this suspect is not the only one to bring a loaded weapon to a riot. The situations are chaotic and ever-changing. Follow directions for law enforcement. Don't inject yourself knowingly beforehand into a law enforcement situation. The victims are the Border Patrol agents. I'm not blaming the Border Patrol agents. The victim are the Border Patrol agents. The suspect put himself in that situation. The victims are the Border Patrol agents there. Dana, you don't know he was unarmed. I don't know he was unarmed. That's freeze frame adjudication of a crime scene via a photo. That's why we have investigators. That's why we have an investigation that is going to answer those questions. How many shots were fired? Who fired shots? Where was the guns? Where were the guns located? All those questions are going to be answered in the investigation. We're not going to adjudicate that here on TV in one freeze frame there. We don't know that agent was taking any gun away. That could have been the agents, because we don't know that. The facts are going to come to light as to what exactly happened with an investigation. That's why we investigate. He brought a semi-automatic weapon to a riot, assaulted federal officers, and at some point they saw that weapon. So I do believe the secretary is 100% spot on in what she said. Why would you bring a weapon and assault a federal officer if you did not have intent to harm or delay or obstruct that federal officer with a weapon? No, the problem is, as I said several times now, is he injected himself. He put himself where he did not need to be. He put himself in and put law enforcement officers in jeopardy through his actions. These were his actions, not law enforcement officers' action. We had to react to an individual that came there for a specific reason. And again, what that reason is, we're going to find more out about that in the coming days. I'll be interested to see what his reason for being there, while Border Patrol agents were arresting a violent criminal, illegal alien doing their lawful, ethical, and moral duties in Minneapolis? That's the question. It's not clear. He wasn't there to clearly document anything. Don't socially engineer the topic, Dana. He was not there to document. He came there for a reason, and he obfuscated and delayed officers there on the scene. That's pretty evident to me. Yes, all of our Border Patrol agents are trained in for all types of environments, including urban policing. This particular Border Patrol agent had 8 years with some specific skill sets there with both firearms and less lethal munitions. Also, let's take a look at the training and the environments that Border Patrol agents operate in. We operate in places like San Diego, California, Tucson, Arizona, New Orleans. All those have Border Patrol sectors. Detroit, Michigan. We've got Border Patrol sectors in Buffalo. So this myth, and I saw this just last night on CNN, this myth that Border Patrol agents don't work in urban areas is just that. It's a myth. We're well adept at urban areas, conducting that Title VIII immigration enforcement wherever we go. It doesn't matter if it's a desert or an urban environment. We're very well adept at doing that. Again, that's going to be part of the investigation. I'm not going to speculate on how many shots or who shot or that type of thing because I don't know. Yes, these Border Patrol agents are going to more than likely be on administrative duty, but they will remain Border Patrol agents. Yes, yes. Not in Minneapolis, they will, but only in Minneapolis. Here, they'll be at a different location. I believe that all citizens of the United States have those First and Fourth Amendment rights as long as they do so peacefully and don't delay, obstruct, or assault anyone in doing that. And that's the issue here because he was not peacefully doing anything.